Why did the wind feel like it carried a warning, one none of them were ready to hear? Lee Monroe felt it first. A shift in the air, thin and cold, brushing against the back of her neck as if the mountain itself was whispering something she couldn't quite translate. She stood slightly apart from Viper Recon while the others adjusted gear, checked magazines, pulled straps tight. She didn't like being in the center of crowds. Didn't like how other units looked at her, half curiosity, half dismissal. It was easier to pretend she didn't hear the whispers. That's the quiet one. Keeps to herself. Pretty sure she's too soft for this ridge. She tried to ignore it, just like she tried to ignore the low throb in her shoulder, the one place the cold always found first. She pulled her glove tighter and focused on the map table, where Captain Rowan Hale went still, studying the terrain as if it were breathing. The briefing tent was cramped, loud with the hum of generators and the metallic snap of weapons being checked. The lights swayed overhead with each hard gust outside. Two rangers near the corner didn't bother lowering their voices. Viper Recon won't last an hour up there, one muttered. Especially with her on the line, the other whispered, chin flicking toward Lee. No one defended her, not that it mattered, she never expected them to. But she noticed the brief pause in Hale's movement, a half-second where the captain's jaw tightened, not from anger but from recognition. Hale heard it. Hale always heard everything. Lee kept her face still, hands steady, though inside something small twisted. Doubt wasn't new, it just grated harder tonight. She shifted her weight and found Cole Maddox looking at her, the same way he looked at everyone he respected, quietly, without judgment. He lifted his machine gun strap to settle it better against his ribs, hiding the wince he thought no one saw. Maddox was always doing that, carrying heavy weight so others wouldn't have to. Dax Rohr checked the radios with hands that weren't quite steady. 21, nervous, trying too hard not to look nervous. Lee didn't judge him either. Fear meant you cared. Only fools felt nothing before a mission. "Eyes up," Captain Hale said finally, her voice steady but soft in a way that made everyone listen. "Fog's coming down early. We move in 10. No speeches, no bravado, just calm direction." Lee admired that in her. How Hale carried authority like a quiet truth instead of a loud performance. As they prepared to head out, a distant boom rolled across the ridge. Not close but not far enough to ignore. Dax flinched. Maddox steadied him with a hand on the back of his shoulder. "You're fine," the gunner murmured. The wind pushed harder, slipping ice under every layer of clothing. Lee tightened her scarf and followed the team out of the tent. The cold didn't bother her anymore. She'd known worse. Much worse. Sometimes she wondered if the ridge remembered people like her, the ones who didn't talk much, who watched everything, who carried a past they didn't speak of, not even when asked. She brushed her fingers lightly over her wrist, where the faded patch inside her sleeve pressed against her skin like an echo of another life. Something she had never explained. Something she wasn't ready to. Not yet. The fog was already crawling down the higher peaks, thin ribbons pulling across the rocks. The drylands always felt hostile, but tonight felt different, alive, listening. Captain Hale took point. "Stay tight, no silhouettes on the horizon, move like the fog owns you." Lee followed the rhythm of the team, footsteps silent, breath steady, heart conflicted. She was good at this, letting the cold strip away everything but focus. But tonight something gnawed at her, a tension she couldn't name. As they ascended the narrow ridge, the world shrank to muted grays and shifting shadows. The fog thickened fast, swallowing boulders, erasing sky. Lee checked her scope, adjusting for moisture on the lens. Her thigh ached, old scar tissue prickling with the cold. Ray's, their medic, glanced back at her. "You all right, Monroe?" "Fine," she murmured. It wasn't the truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Hale paused at a natural choke point, raising a fist. Everyone froze. The silence stretched. Lee held her breath without meaning to. Then the fog shifted, and the mountain seemed to groan. Maddox whispered, "Anyone else feel that?" Before anyone could answer, the first mortar screamed through the darkness and slammed into the slope below. The shockwave hit them like a punch, rattling teeth and helmets. Dax stumbled, Rays caught him. Another mortar hit closer this time, too close. The ridge trembled under their boots. Hale's voice cut through the chaos. "Positions now." Maddox swung the machine gun forward, face twisting from pain but never hesitation. Rays pulled Private Lang down behind a jagged rock. Lee dropped to a knee, cheek pressed to her rifle, breathing slow, steady, disciplined. Her pulse didn't race. It focused. Movement flickered through the fog, too many shapes too fast. "Captain," Lee whispered, "we've got numbers a lot." Hale didn't ask for confirmation. She trusted her. "A rare thing." "Anchor in," the captain said quietly. "This is a push." Rounds snapped across the ridge. Maddox fired controlled bursts, each flash lighting the carved lines of exhaustion on his face. Dax tried channel after channel, but static swallowed everything. "Captain, nothing. They're jamming us hard." Hale crouched beside him. "Keep trying." Another mortar hit so close the world went white for a heartbeat. Lang cried out, shrapnel tearing through his leg. Rays moved instantly. "Stay with me," he whispered, pressing bandages down as blood warmed his gloves. A grenade clinked against stone. Lee didn't think she moved, threw herself over Lang, curling around him as the blast ripped through the air behind them. Shrapnel tore into her shoulder and thigh. Her body jerked but didn't fall. She didn't scream. Ray slid toward her. "Lee, talk to me." "I'm good, Eli, check him first." Hale looked at her team, bleeding, surrounded, losing ground inch by inch. Her hand hovered over the emergency beacon. Lee watched her, chest tight. Would she risk everything, or hope the impossible? The next mortar answered for her. It blasted them backward, ears ringing, vision shaking. Hale pressed the switch. A sharp beep. A final hope. "Rescue is on its way," she whispered. "We hold." But Lee wasn't sure help would come. And deep inside, under pain and fear, an older dread stirred, one she kept locked away. Because she knew something she hadn't told them. Not yet. The ridge wasn't done with them. And the night wasn't finished. What if the first sound of hope wasn't a shout, but a single, impossible gunshot? Lee heard it before anyone else, clean, controlled, cutting through the chaos with a confidence that didn't belong to the night. Her bloodied hands froze mid-reload. The crack echoed down the ridge and seemed to linger longer than any mortar blast. A hostile figure dropped instantly in the fog below. No stumble, no cry, just folded like someone had pulled a thread. Maddox jerked his head toward the sound. That wasn't one of ours. Another shot answered him, distant but sharp. Another hostile collapsed. Dax blinked hard. "Captain, we don't have friendlies on that ridge, right?" Hale didn't answer. She never guessed when she could observe. Her eyes narrowed as she mapped the angles in her mind, tracing sound to terrain. Rays glanced up from Private Lang, his hands still working pressure bandages, breath tight. "We're getting help from somewhere." "Or someone," Maddox muttered. But Lee didn't look confused. She looked haunted. Her gaze fixed on the northern ridge, her eyes narrowing not in shock, but in recognition, as if something old and buried was crawling back into the light. Rays caught the shift. "Monroe, you know something." She didn't answer, not yet. Not with the fog crawling thicker, not with the mortars recalibrating, not with enemy forces pushing harder as if trying to drown out whatever phantom had entered the battlefield. Because Lee wasn't sure she wanted the team to know. Another shot whispered across the valley, precise, intentional, expert. Lee closed her eyes just for a heartbeat. "It can't be." But the pattern, the timing, the silence, the cold efficiency, she knew that rhythm. She felt it in her bones. A ghost from her past. Someone she hadn't seen in years. Someone she thought she'd never see again. Someone she wasn't ready to explain. Hale crouched beside her. "Talk to me, Monroe." Lee swallowed once, pain tightening her breath. "Those shots, they're not random." She hesitated, every part of her torn between duty and fear. "Whoever's firing, they know exactly what they're doing." "Explain," Hale said steady. But Lee couldn't. Not without opening a door she'd spent years keeping shut. Before she could find the words, the mountain answered for her. A heavy impact shook the ridge. Enemy technicals, armored trucks, growled through the fog, engines snarling as mounted guns began to rise like dark shapes from the smoke. Dax stared in horror. "Captain, those .50s will shred us." Maddox braced the machine gun, ribs screaming. "We fall back, we die. We stay, we die slower." Hale steadied him with a firm hand. "We hold." But the truth pressed like a weight on every shoulder. They were losing. They were cornered. They were outnumbered, bleeding, jammed, isolated, and the enemy wasn't stopping. Then the impossible happened again. A shot cracked from the northern ridge. The heavy gunner on the first technical slumped forward before he fired a single round. The vehicle spun, skidding sideways on loose rock. Dax stared, breath fogging in disbelief. "There's no angle, Captain. There is literally no angle from that ridge." Another shot. The driver of the second technical dropped. The truck slammed into a boulder. The battlefield shifted like someone was rearranging it by hand. Ray's exhaled shakily. "Someone up there is playing chess." Maddox let out a low whistle, and they're 3 moves ahead of everyone. But for Lee, each shot felt like a memory resurfacing. Something tight wrapped around her ribs, not fear, not relief, a deeper ache. Recognition felt like a punch. Hale saw it. "Monroe, who is she?" It wasn't an accusation, it was concern, trust, the kind of trust Lee didn't feel she deserved. She looked down at her blood-soaked sleeve. "Someone I used to know." "Used to," Hale pressed. Lee opened her mouth to answer. And a counter-sniper fired from the far slope, the round snapping inches from Hale's boot. Another shot followed. Then another. A duel. Silence. Then a body toppled down the rocky incline, enemy sniper rifle tumbling beside it. Whoever the unknown shooter was, she hadn't just won the duel, she ended it instantly. Dax whispered, "Captain, this doesn't make sense. One person can't." Ray's cut in softly. "You're not seeing the whole fight. You're seeing the parts she wants you to see." Lee exhaled shakily. "She's shaping the field." Hale froze. "Monroe, say the name." But Lee couldn't, not yet. Not with the battlefield shifting again, faster now, tighter now, like an invisible hand was closing every threat one by one. Down the valley, mortars tried to reposition. A shot shattered their momentum. Spotter down. Another shot. Loader down. A third. Tube silent. Maddox breathed. "She's dismantling them." Hale's expression shifted, something between awe and calculation. Not dismantling, prioritizing. Enemy voices crackled through Dax's radio, unfiltered, panicked, desperate. "She's on the north ridge. We can't see her. The ghost. She moves and we don't. She's everywhere. We're losing. We're losing." The enemy was terrified. Not of Viper Recon. Of her. Lee pressed her hand against the cold stone, trying to steady her breath as the past clawed up through her ribs. She remembered sharp training grounds. Hard voices. Cold mornings. A silhouette correcting her posture with one touch. A woman who moved like wind through stone. A marksman whose silence taught Lee everything she knew about patience, restraint, and the cost of pulling a trigger. Lynx, not a call sign you found in any system. Not a name you whispered casually. A ghost, a phantom, a myth dressed in real scars. And she was here, on this ridge, breaking an entire assault force apart because Viper Recon was cornered. Because Lee was here. That truth terrified her more than the mortars. The fog shifted again. Dawn was nowhere close, but the horizon thinned enough to reveal silhouettes below, broken trucks, scattered bodies, fleeing shapes. The unknown sniper was winning the night. Alone. Reyes pressed a hand against Lee's bandaged thigh. You're shaking. She wiped her mouth with the back of her glove, smearing dirt and blood. I know. You scared of her? Maddox asked quietly. No. A beat. Yes. Hale leaned close enough that Lee felt the steadying weight of her presence. Tell me why. Lee took a slow breath. A trembling breath. Because the truth was more dangerous than the enemy. She wasn't supposed to be here, Lee whispered. If she's come this far, it means trouble followed her. What kind of trouble? Lee stared into the fog. The kind you don't outrun. A final crack rang out, soft, suppressed, absolute. And the last hostile on the ridge fell. The battlefield went still, not peaceful, not safe, but held together by the fragile silence between breaths. Dax took off his headset slowly, as if afraid sound might break the spell. Captain, what now? Hale studied the northern ridge, voice quiet with awe she rarely allowed herself. We wait, she murmured, because she's coming down that mountain. And Lee felt her pulse spike. Because if Lynx was coming, then fate had just reopened a chapter she had promised herself she would never face again. What do you do when the person you fear is the only one keeping you alive? Lee Monroe had never wanted to see Lynx again, not on a battlefield, not in a moment like this, not while bleeding through her uniform, surrounded by her team, with the ridge trembling under the aftermath of a night that should have killed them. But fate wasn't interested in what she wanted. The fog shifted again, not blown by wind but pushed aside by motion somewhere above. A faint silhouette appeared for half a second on the northern ridge, then vanished, a ghost slipping between breaths. Dax whispered, Captain, she's moving. Maddox checked his barrel, breath harsh. Can't see a thing. Reyes wiped blood off his gloves onto his pants. Does she want us to? No one answered. Not even Lee. Because she knew the truth. If Lynx didn't want to be seen, they wouldn't see her. If she didn't want to be found, nobody would find her. Not a unit. Not a drone. Not the enemy. Not the military she once belonged to. Not even Lee. And that was what scared her. Eyes up, Captain Hale said quietly. She'll reveal herself if she chooses. Lee swallowed hard, throat tight. Her shoulder throbbed from shrapnel buried too deep for field treatment, and her thigh wound pulsed with each heartbeat. She tried to brace her rifle anyway, because the one thing she refused to be right now was dead weight. Reyes gently touched her wrist. Lee, you need to lie back. I'm fine. You're not. Still breathing, aren't I? Reyes gave her a look, tired, frustrated, but full of the kind of care medics carried whether they wanted to or not. She didn't meet it. She kept her eyes on the fog. And then, cutting through the cold silence, came the sound nobody expected. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Just one pair. Not rushed. Not cautious. Not hesitant. A walk of someone who didn't fear what waited on this ridge. Maddox raised his machine gun halfway, but Hale placed a hand on the barrel and guided it down. Hold, she murmured. They waited. The fog thinned just enough. A figure stepped out of the gray veil. Small frame. Lean muscle. Unmarked uniform. rifle slung with effortless balance across her back. Lynx. She moved like someone who had walked these mountains since the earth was young, quiet, balanced, centered even though the ground was uneven and broken from mortar blasts. Reyes inhaled sharply. Dax forgot to breathe entirely. Maddox shifted his feet, face unreadable for once. But Hale watched with the studied caution of someone who recognized a different kind of warrior. And Lee felt her heart fold into itself. Lynx didn't look at them first. She looked at the battlefield the same way she had always looked at everything, like she was mapping every angle, every exit, every possibility. Like she saw not just the aftermath but the next hour, the next move, the next danger, the next ripple of consequence. Only then did she turn her head toward Viper Recon. Her eyes settled on Lee last. Not in surprise, not in relief, but in a quiet acknowledgement that felt heavier than any words. Reyes whispered under his breath, "Holy, she's real." Dax nodded, voice trembling, "She shouldn't be." Lynx stopped a few feet away, standing across from Captain Hale. "You were up there," Hale said quietly. Lynx nodded once. "No pride. No drama. Just fact." Lee closed her fingers into her palm, nails digging into skin. Pain grounded her, tethered her to the moment so she didn't drown in the flood of memory rising like a tide. Lynx spoke first. "Your position was compromised." Her voice was low, measured, carrying a calm that cut through the cold. Not soft, not harsh, just controlled, like everything she did. Hale kept her tone level. "We held as long as we could." "You held longer than most," Lynx said. "Long enough for me to reach the ridge." Maddox exhaled sharply. "You moved through that terrain in the dark." Lynx didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was the answer. Then her eyes returned to Lee. And Lee felt every breath she'd taken that night tighten in her chest. Lynx walked closer, not toward Hale, not toward Reyes, but toward her. She knelt slowly, examining the bandages on Lee's leg with hands as steady as cold steel. "You're losing more blood than the medic realized," Lynx said. Reyes bristled. "Hey." "Not your fault," she added calmly. "The shrapnel's lodged deep, bleeding internal and external." She looked up. "You kept fighting on this." Lee didn't answer. She didn't need to. Lynx's eyes flicked with something small. Not quite disappointment, not quite concern, something older. Hale watched the exchange, nodding every detail the way commanders notice storms before they break. "You two know each other," Hale said. Silence stretched. Lee's throat tightened. Lynx finally straightened. "We've crossed paths." Lee stared at the ground. A faint tremor ran through her fingers. She didn't want the team to hear this. Not now, not after everything. Not ever. But the past didn't ask permission. Maddox stepped forward, careful but direct. "Then maybe you can explain what the hell happened up there." Lynx didn't look at him. "I kept you alive." Dax swallowed. "Why?" Lynx finally looked at Lee again. "Because someone on this ridge matters." The words hit Lee like a rifle stock to the ribs. Reyes' gaze shifted between them, questions rising faster than he could hold them back. Hale didn't push. She didn't need to. She just watched the way Lee's breath hitched, the way Lynx's posture shifted, just a fraction, but enough to show something human under the frost. "Who sent you?" Hale asked. "No one. You're running solo." "I run where I choose." "And tonight you chose here," Hale said quietly. "Why?" Lynx didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't flinch. "Because the ridge wasn't supposed to take her." Lee shut her eyes. Dax whispered, "Her who?" Lee couldn't say it. Her voice wouldn't come. So Lynx said it for her. "Lee." The name hung in the cold air, quiet, heavy, undeniable. Reyes exhaled sharply. Maddox went still. Dax looked from one woman to the other like the world had tilted without warning. Hale's voice softened, steady but firm. "Monroe, is there something you need to tell us?" Lee forced her eyes open, throat tight, heart shaking in her chest like it had been hit with recoil. "I knew her," Lee whispered, "before the army." Lynx's gaze deepened, not sharp, not emotional, but knowing. "Before everything." The wind howled across the ridge, carrying the weight of the past with it. Reyes moved closer, lowering his voice. "Lee, who is she?" Lee swallowed once. The truth tasted like old steel. "She was my instructor." Dax blinked. "Instructor where?" Lee stared into the fog. "In a place that doesn't exist on paper." Hale didn't look surprised. She just nodded once, as if fitting the final piece of a puzzle she'd been assembling all night. Lynx stepped back, giving Lee space she didn't feel ready for. "You shouldn't have come," Lee said quietly. "I didn't come for you," Lynx replied. Lee met her eyes. Lynx added, "I came because the people hunting me would have hit this ridge whether you were here or not." Hale's eyes sharpened, meaning. Lynx looked toward the valley. "They weren't here only for you." Silence clenched around the team. Even the wind seemed to stop. Dax whispered, "Then what were they after?" Lynx tightened her gloves, eyes cold against the dawn. "They were after me." The world around them narrowed to a single breath. A single truth. And Lee felt her stomach drop. Because the danger wasn't over. It had only just arrived. What if the enemy you just survived wasn't even the real threat? The moment Lynx said the words, "They were after me," a cold stillness clamped down on the ridge, thicker than the fog had been all night. Reyes froze with a bandage half-taped. Dax's fingers hovered above the radio like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Maddox went quiet in that dangerous way. Seasoned gunners went quiet when they sensed a shift in the battlefield's heartbeat. And Lee Monroe. She felt something inside her collapse inward. A familiar dread. A memory she had spent years burying. Captain Hale was the first to speak. "Explain." Lynx didn't rush. She never rushed anything, not her movements, not her speech, not her decisions. She stood with the calm posture of someone who had survived darker nights than this one. "They weren't here for the ridge," she said. "They weren't here for your unit." Her eyes drifted to Lee, just briefly, too brief for the others to catch, but Lee felt it like a blade skimming old scars. "They were here to flush me out." Maddox rubbed a hand over his jaw. Why would an entire assault force target one person? "Because they weren't an assault force," Lynx replied. "They were contractors, freelancers, ex-military from multiple borders." Reyes frowned. "Mercenaries." "Mercenaries don't coordinate mortars, armored technicals, counter-snipers, and electronic jamming with that level of precision," Hale said. "This was planned." "Exactly," Lynx said. Dax swallowed hard. "So who hired them?" Lynx didn't answer. Silence stretched so tight it felt like it would snap. Hale stepped forward, lowering her voice. "If we're exposed to your conflict, we need to know the threat." "It's not my conflict," Lynx said. "It's my past." The words hit Lee like a punch, because she knew exactly what that meant. Reyes looked between them. "Lee, you knew something. You recognized the pattern. What aren't you telling us?" Lee's throat tightened. Her shoulder burned. Her thigh felt on fire, but none of that pain compared to the one rising in her chest. "I trained under her," Lee said quietly. "Before the army, before any of this." Reyes blinked. "Trained where?" Lee looked down at her hands. The bandages were soaked with her blood. Dirt lined her nails. Her fingers trembled, and she hated that they did. "In a program that doesn't officially exist." Dax whispered, "A black program." Lynx cut in, "A mistake." Lee flinched, barely perceptible, but Lynx caught it. Hale's gaze sharpened. "You walked away." I tried, Lee whispered. Lynx spoke with a calm that was too practiced to be comforting. Walking away from places like that doesn't erase your name from the wrong lists. Maddox exhaled, realization dawning. And now someone wants you dead to clean up loose ends. Someone wants everyone who passed through that program dead, Lynx corrected. Her eyes returned to Lee, especially the ones who got out. Ray stepped closer protectively, placing himself between Lee and Lynx without even realizing it. Lynx noticed. Hale noticed. Lee didn't move. She only asked the one question she feared the answer to. How long have they been tracking you? Lynx hesitated. The slightest hesitation, a crack in her armor that only Lee would recognize. Long enough. Lee's stomach dropped. Then you should have stayed away from us. I tried, Lynx replied evenly. Hale stepped forward. Then why come here, why engage, why help us at all? Because once they locked onto your ridge you were going to die with or without me, Lynx said. They had kill orders, no survivors, no signals leaving the valley. Dax shivered, so we were collateral. Not collateral, Lynx said, convenience. The words hit harder than any mortar. Ray's clenched his jaw. So what now, are more coming? Lynx finally looked toward the horizon. The fog was clearing in thin, ghostly tendrils, revealing the pale stretch of gray morning. Not immediately, she said. The ones sent tonight were specialists, expensive, coordinated. Whoever hired them won't waste another wave until they confirm what happened here. And when they do, Hale asked. Lynx's silence was the answer. Dax let out a faint, terrified laugh. We're dead. No, Hale said quickly with steel in her voice. We're not. But even she felt the weight settling. Lee forced herself to breathe. Lynx, she said quietly. Why now? Why come out of the shadows? Why risk exposing yourself? Lynx's expression shifted, not enough to show emotion, but enough to hint at something behind her eyes. You weren't supposed to be here, she said softly. Lee froze. Lynx stepped closer, voice lower. I watched the rosters. You weren't assigned to this sector. When I saw your call sign rerouted here 2 weeks ago. She inhaled, slow and controlled. I knew the people hunting me would find us both. Ray's eyes widened. She came to protect you. No, Lee whispered. She came to prevent me from becoming a target. Lynx didn't correct her. Hale watched the exchange closely, too closely. She didn't miss how Lee's breathing changed, how Lynx's presence carved through her composure, how something unspoken passed between them like history replaying in silence. You trained her, Hale said softly. Lynx nodded once. And now someone wants the both of you erased. Lynx nodded again. Maddox ran a hand over his face. We're in the middle of a damn ghost war. No, Lynx said. You're standing on the edge of one. Dax finally sank down onto a rock, staring at the ground. So what do we do? Lee answered before Lynx could. We get off the ridge, we regroup, we. Lynx shook her head. Running won't help. Hale crossed her arms. So what then? Fight an invisible enemy. You don't need to fight them, Lynx said. You just need to stay out of their way. And you, Lee asked. Lynx's eyes softened, just barely. I'll draw them off. Lee felt her chest tighten so sharply it stole her breath. Don't. It's the only way. You don't owe me anything. Lynx held her gaze, and the fog seemed to fall silent around them. I owe you everything, she said quietly. The words nearly broke Lee. Maddox shifted uncomfortably, looking away. Ray swallowed hard. Dax blinked fast, pretending he wasn't listening. Hale took a slow step forward. You walk alone, they'll kill you. They can try, Lynx said simply. Ray stepped between her and the path down the ridge. No, you don't get to just walk away into another firefight. We barely survived this one. Lynx didn't move. Lee forced her voice steady. You can't fight them alone, not anymore. Lynx's gaze locked with hers. I've always fought alone. Not now. A long moment passed. Too long. Too heavy. Then Lynx looked away first. A rare thing. A painful thing. Leaving now gives you time, she said quietly, and you need every hour. Hale's voice tightened. Where will you go? Where the shadows pull, Lynx replied. And if they find you, Lee asked. Lynx looked at her, really looked at her. Then at least they won't find you. Before anyone could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the valley, deep, metallic, unnatural. Engine noise. More than one. Maddox's eyes widened. That's not ours. Hale lifted her rifle. Positions. Reyes grabbed his bag. Dax scrambled to the radios. Lee braced her rifle even though her hands shook with pain. Lynx didn't reach for her weapon. She simply stepped toward the fog, eyes narrowing. They're early, she murmured. Who? Reyes demanded. Lynx exhaled once, calmly, like someone preparing to step into a fire they'd walked through before. The hunters. Lee's stomach dropped. Lynx. But Lynx didn't look back. She stepped into the fog. And vanished. The engines grew louder. And Viper Recon realized. The night had only been the beginning. What if the one person who saved you was also the one person you couldn't afford to lose? The engines in the valley growled louder, heavy, coordinated, moving in a formation that didn't belong to local militias or untrained mercenaries. This was something else, something organized, something that moved with purpose. Lee Monroe forced herself to sit straighter despite the pain burning through her leg and shoulder. Her breath shook as she chambered around. Every instinct in her screamed that Lynx was walking straight into danger that even she couldn't outrun. Reyes pressed a hand on Lee's shoulder. Don't move. You'll tear every stitch I just put in. She shouldn't be alone, Lee whispered. Maddox scanned the ridge with the machine gun. Kid, she wasn't alone. She was above us the entire night. Dax clutched the broken radio, teeth clenched. I can't get a signal through. We're blind. Hale stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the fog swallow the last ghost of Lynx's silhouette. Her expression stayed calm, but Lee could see the tension in her jaw. Lynx had given them one truth before disappearing into the gray morning. They're early. Which meant she expected a hunt. Which meant she expected to be found. Which meant she didn't plan to come back up that ridge. Lee swallowed hard as the engines rumbled deeper, closer, vibrating through the rocks beneath them. Hale, Maddox said quietly, we can't stay here. Hale didn't look at him. I know. The medic's right, he added, nodding toward Lee. We need to move her. Lee didn't argue. She didn't have the strength to. Instead, she stared at the fog where Lynx had vanished, fighting the pressure in her chest, fighting the fear she didn't have time to feel. Dax pointed toward the valley, multiple vehicles, not the same ones from last night. Reyes tightened his grip on his med kit. Then who? Hale turned toward her team with the same calm she carried, even when the world was falling apart around them. We move now. Dax hesitated, but Lynx would want us alive, not waiting to be wiped out, Hale said. Lee opened her mouth to protest, but stopped when she realized her voice wouldn't steady. Reyes slid his arm under her shoulders, helping her rise. The pain flared so sharply, it nearly dropped her back to the ground. Easy, he whispered. Lee forced herself upright. We won't outrun vehicles. We're not trying to outrun them, Hale said. We're trying to disappear long enough for QRF to get back here. They just left, Dax murmured. They won't return that fast. They don't need to, Hale said. We just need to not die in the next hour. Maddox lifted the machine gun, grits his teeth as his ribs screamed. Then let's buy that hour. They moved. Slow, wounded, but moving. Down the opposite side of the ridge, into jagged rock paths that weren't in the maps, into tight choke points only goats and ghosts used, away from the open valley where engines growled like metal predators. The fog thinned as they descended, but Lee's mind refused to let go of the image of Lynx disappearing into it. Ray steadied her carefully. "Talk to me, don't go quiet." Lee's voice came out thin. "She shouldn't have come here. She saved us." "She shouldn't have come," Lee repeated, breath shaking. "She doesn't owe me anything, not anymore." Ray's looked at her confused. "Monroe, what was she to you?" The question hit harder than shrapnel. But Lee couldn't answer. Not yet, not here. Before she could find words, Maddox's voice snapped through the air. "Contact, movement on the ridge." They froze. Up above them, silhouettes. 5, maybe 6. Moving with precision, not chaos. Hale pulled Lee toward the rocks. Down. Dax slid beside them, shaking hands trying to load another battery into a cracked tablet. "They're tracking the terrain. They're not searching randomly." "Because they know who they're hunting," Lee whispered. Shots cracked from up the ridge, sharp, controlled. Recon rounds, measuring distance. Rays pulled Lee under a jut of stone, shielding her with his own body. Maddox set the machine gun against a rock shelf. "Captain, permission to return fire." "Denied," Hale said instantly. "If they don't have eyes on us, we don't give them any." More rounds struck the rocks higher up, probing, testing. "They're sweeping," Dax muttered, "grid by grid." Ray's breathing tightened. "We won't survive a sweep." Hale scanned their surroundings, calculating angles as fast as Lynx did. "We keep moving," she said. "Stay low, use the terrain." Lee forced her legs to move. Every step felt like the mountain was cutting into her skin from the inside. The engines in the valley grew louder. The sweeps above grew closer. And Lee realized something terrifying. Lynx wasn't drawing them away. They were triangulating, closing in, hunting her. And if Lynx doubled back, they'd collide right here. Hale suddenly raised a fist. Everyone froze. A faint shape emerged between the rocks ahead. Slim, balanced, motion smooth, not threatening but urgent. "Lynx," Rays whispered. She came back. But Lee saw something in Lynx's posture that froze her blood cold. Not confidence. Not calm. Pressure. Lynx wasn't returning. She was being herded. Hale stepped forward. "They found you." Lynx nodded once. 3 teams. They're pushing from the high ridge, the lower pass, and the valley. "That's a pincer," Maddox murmured. "No," Lynx said. "That's a kill box." Lee's pulse spiked. "Why come back here?" Lynx looked straight at her. "Because you wouldn't survive what's coming." Lee swallowed. "Then tell us what's coming." Lynx hesitated, only for a breath, but long enough for Lee to feel dread coil tight in her spine. "They sent in hunters." Dax blinked. "Hunters like tracking teams?" "No," Lynx said, "like execution units." Rays whispered. "How do you know?" Lynx's jaw tensed. "Because I trained some of them." A long, suffocating silence followed. Lee felt every word land inside her like ice. Hale spoke quietly, carefully. "Can they be stopped?" "Yes." "How?" Lynx spoke without flinching. "You kill them." Before anyone could respond, a sharp metallic snap echoed through the rocks, like someone stepping on a pressure switch. Lynx's eyes widened. "Down." Hale pulled Lee toward the ground. But the explosion didn't hit them. It detonated 50 feet ahead, sending rock shrapnel upward, a signal charge. Dax's voice cracked. "They marked our location." "No," Lynx said, breath tight. "They marked mine." Footsteps began pouring toward them from 2 directions. Lynx turned to Hale. Get your team out of the valley. Lee grabbed her wrist. You can't take them alone. Lynx didn't pull away, but her eyes softened. You're injured, Monroe. You can't fight beside me. I'm not letting you go alone. You don't get to choose. Lee's breath shook. You once said I never hesitated. And you shouldn't start now, Lynx cut in. Move. The footsteps grew louder. Close. Too close. Maddox lifted his gun. Captain, what's the call? Hale looked at her team. Bleeding. Exhausted. Outnumbered. Then she looked at Lynx. A lone ghost built for nights like this. Finally, Hale nodded once, heavy, reluctant, but decisive. We move. Rays lifted Lee carefully. Lee reached for Lynx, but Lynx stepped back, fading into the shadows between the rocks. Lynx, Lee whispered. Lynx paused, just long enough to say, I'll find you when it's over. Then she vanished, and the hunters arrived. How do you walk away from someone who walked into danger for you? Lee Monroe didn't remember the exact moment Hale's order, we move, turned into motion. Everything blurred into instinct. Rays pulling her forward, Maddox covering the rear, wincing with every step, Dax scrambling over uneven rocks, slipping twice but refusing help. Hale leading them down the narrow pass, her eyes never leaving the shifting fog behind them. But Lee remembered the last thing she saw. Lynx stepping into the shadows as if they welcomed her back. Shoulders squared. Rifle balanced. Movement calm, controlled, nothing hesitant, nothing panicked. She had walked into the hunt the way others walked into daylight. And Lee felt something crack inside her. The kind of crack that didn't bleed, didn't bruise, didn't scream. The kind that quietly reshaped the foundation of who you were. Monroe, stay with me, Rays said, breath strained as he guided her down the rocks. Talk anything. Lee forced herself to speak. She won't make it alone. She will, Maddox muttered from behind them. We all saw what she did last night. That's not the same, Lee whispered. Those weren't hunters. Dax looked over his shoulder, fear tightening his voice. Then what are they? Lee answered with a voice that barely reached the wind. They're people trained to erase mistakes. The fog above thinned, revealing jagged silhouettes moving along the high ridge edges. Lee felt her chest squeeze. They were closing the box. Hale guided them down the steep descent, breath controlled despite the exhaustion pulling at her limbs. We keep going. Lower canyon funnel, 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a long time, Rays said. Then we move faster. They half climbed, half slid down the sharp slope. Lee bit down on her lip as pain flared hard enough to blur her vision. Rays steadied her again. Maddox shifted behind her, turning his body to shield hers from the higher ridge. Then a sound tore through the valley. Not a gunshot. Not an explosion. Something else. A short, sharp metallic echo, like a suppressed shot hitting stone. Then another. And another. Dax froze. Captain, is that? No, Lee whispered before Hale could speak. That's not her. Hale's jaw tightened. Hunters found contact. Rays swallowed. Contact with who? Lee didn't answer. Because she knew. The team stopped only when Hale raised a fist. They huddled beneath an overhang carved into the rock. Lee leaned heavily on Rays, chest aching with each breath. Maddox took position, watching the ridge above. They're engaging someone. Rays looked at Lee. You think she's still? A single shot cracked. Clean. Cold. Precise. Lee closed her eyes. That one was hers. Silence pressed against them. Not peace. Not safety. A silence heavy, with the sound of someone fighting alone. Hale crouched near the overhang entrance, rifle steady. Monroe, what are her odds? Lee forced her eyes open. The fog blurred her vision but not her thoughts. If she controls the angles, she can drop the first team. A breath. But not all three. Reyes whispered, she knows that. I know, Lee said. The engines shifted direction. Tires scraped rock. Voices echoed faintly, muffled, controlled, moving with a practiced rhythm. The hunters were adjusting. Maddox exhaled. Captain, if those guys catch her. They won't, Hale said, but her voice held a fracture Lee hadn't heard before. Another suppressed shot cracked through the distance. Then another. But the space between them grew longer. Too long. Dax whispered, she's slowing. Lee's pulse spiked. We have to go back. Reyes tightened his arm around her waist to keep her from standing. You can't. She needs backup. You're bleeding out. Hale turned to Lee, voice steady but heavy. If we go back, we all die. Lee felt anger rise, not at Hale, not at her team, but at the truth she couldn't escape. She didn't have to come for me. She didn't have to step into that ridge. She didn't have to. But she did, Hale cut in softly, because that's who she is. Lee slammed her fist against the rock, a dull, painful thud. I owe her more than this. Then live, Hale said. Live so her choice means something. Lee's breath hitched. A distant shout echoed across the canyon, short, abrupt. Not English. Reyes tensed. What was that? Maddox answered grimly. Someone spotted her. A burst of gunfire followed, tight, disciplined, coordinated. Hunters. Not a spray. Not panic. Targeted volleys. Then silence again. Dax's hands shook. Captain, is she? Lee didn't blink. No. How can you know? Because she's still controlling the fight, Lee whispered. If she fell, they'd rush. They'd talk. They signal. They wouldn't be quiet. The wind swept through the canyon. A single shot cracked. Then another, closer this time. Maddox sucked in a breath. She's moving toward us. No, Lee murmured. She's being pushed. Fog thinned just enough for silhouettes to appear at the far edge of the canyon wall. 3 figures. Spread. Balanced. Moving in a clean line. Hunters. Hale's voice dropped low. Positions, carefully, let them pass. But the hunters didn't descend toward the pass. They slowed. Turned. Then angled toward the narrow ledge, leading straight toward Viper Recon's hiding spot. Dax whispered, they're tracking us. No, Lee said quietly. They're tracking her, she's too close. A faint sound echoed behind them. Footsteps. Light. Silent. Measured. Lynx. Reyes angled his rifle, breath caught. Maddox steadied his gun. Hale shifted to cover. Lee held her breath. Lynx emerged through the thinning fog, breathing hard for the first time. A shallow cut marked her cheek. Dust streaked her uniform. Her left hand twitched, just once, just enough for Lee to see she was hurt. But her eyes were still clear. Still calculating. Still Lynx. She stepped toward them, voice low. They found my trail. You need to move, now. Hale shook her head. You're injured. They're close. Maddox pointed up the ridge. We saw 3. There are 5. Dax's voice cracked. We can't outrun 5. You don't have to, Lynx said. Then she set her rifle on the ground. Ray stared. What are you doing? Lynx removed the magazine slowly. Deliberately. The movement was so calm that it terrified Lee more than any gunfire. You survive by disappearing, Lynx said quietly. And you, Lee whispered. Lynx looked at her, really looked. Something in her gaze carried history and apology and truth all woven into one steady line. I step into the light. Lee shook her head. No, you can't. I can. You'll die. Lynx's voice softened. Maybe, but not before I buy you the hours you need. Hale stepped forward, voice breaking through the air like steel. Stand down. That's an order. You are not sacrificing yourself for my team. Lynx didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't explain. She simply said, I wasn't asking permission. Before anyone could stop her, Lynx moved past them, stepping onto the narrow ledge leading into the canyon. Her silhouette cut against the pale fog. One figure, facing 5. Lee's voice trembled. Lynx. Lynx paused, just long enough to say, Live well, Monroe. Then she walked forward, and the hunters moved to meet her. The canyon swallowed the sounds that followed. Sharp echoes, distant shouts, a final burst of controlled gunfire. Then silence, a silence Lee felt deep in her bones. Ray's turned away. Dax wiped at his face with shaking hands. Maddox lowered his gun, jaw clenched. Hale looked at the canyon for a long time, loyalty and respect and grief all tied together in her steady breath. Then she said the only words that could carry them forward. We move. Lee didn't look back. She couldn't. But she carried the silence with her. All the way down the mountain. All the way to safety. All the way into the future she hadn't expected to survive. Days later, in the stillness of a medical tent, Lee received a single envelope with no name, no stamp, no trace. Inside was a small piece of stone gray, smooth, cut from a ridge she knew too well. And a single handwritten line. Some shadows fade, others stand watch, keep moving forward. L. Lee closed her eyes. A breath. A tremor. A truth settling inside her like steady ground. Sometimes the world never learns the name of the person who saved it. Sometimes courage lives unseen. Sometimes valor walks alone so others don't have to. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.